sat on the edge of my bed for 4 minutes this morning before I could stand up. Not because I was in pain, because my body needed a minute and I had to wait. I'm a pharmacist, 30 years behind the counter answering questions about exactly this, about what happens to joints and tissue and bone and muscle as you age. I had good answers. I gave them to hundreds of people. What nobody prepared me for is the difference between knowing something and living inside it. I'm 79. I know more about the biology of this body than most people will ever know. And I will tell you honestly, none of it, not one clinical fact, prepared me for what the last 4 years have actually been. There are 4 things that surprised me. One of them I didn't expect to be a gift. The alarm went off at 6:30, same as always. I reached over and turned it off, sat up, put my feet on the floor, and then I waited. My hip needed a minute. That's what I have started calling it by October of 2021, giving it a minute, as if my body and I had arrived at some negotiation I didn't remember entering. I sat there in the dark on the edge of the bed I've slept in for 31 years, and I waited for my own hip to decide that we were going to stand now. 6:47 in the morning. That detail I remember because I looked at the clock the first time it happened and thought, this is new. I'm a pharmacist, retired, but the training doesn't leave you. For 30 years, I stood behind a counter in a white coat and answered questions about exactly this, about the morning stiffness that settles into load-bearing joints, about synovial fluid, about the mechanics of cartilage loss, about the difference between osteoarthritis and inflammatory disease, about what you can take, when, with what, and why. I had good answers. Patients asked for me specifically. Some of them came to me for 20 years. What I did not know, what nothing in 30 years of pharmaceutical knowledge had prepared me for, was what it would feel like to sit on that edge in the dark and wait. Not in pain. That's the part I would have gotten wrong if you'd asked me beforehand. I would have told you, when the hip goes, you'll feel it. And you do, sometimes. But that morning, it wasn't pain. It was something more like a conversation I hadn't been invited to yet. A preliminary, a checking in that I was now required to do before I could proceed. I thought about Mrs. Patterson. She came to me for years, from about 1997 until I retired. Fibromyalgia, bilateral hip involvement, and the kind of morning stiffness that meant she never scheduled anything before 10. I counseled her about pain management for almost 2 decades. I knew her medications better than her doctors did sometimes. I knew her side effect profile, her tolerance, her preferences. I knew everything about the clinical picture. Sitting on that bed in October 2021, I understood for the first time that I had not known a single thing about what Mrs. Patterson's mornings actually felt like. I retired in 2018. Robert died in March of 2020, a cardiac event, very fast, the second week of the pandemic lockdown. We had been married for 44 years. I tell people it was sudden, which is true, and I tell them I'm managing, which is also true. And what I don't tell them is that the house at 6:30 in the morning is a different kind of quiet now than any quiet I had known before. I grew up in a household that ran on competence. My mother could fix anything. My father worked until he was 78 and never mentioned being tired. I became a pharmacist in part because the logic of it appealed to me. Here is a body of knowledge. Here is a person who needs it. Here is what I can do. It was satisfying in a way that I don't know how to explain to someone who isn't built that way. The knowing and the applying, the patient coming in frightened and leaving less frightened because you gave them accurate information and gave it with authority. That was the assumption I carried forward, that if you understand something, you are prepared for it. That knowledge and readiness are the same thing. I was wrong about that, but I was 77 years old before I found out. My sister Helen is 3 years younger than me. She had a stroke in June of 2022. Left side, partial, meaning the left arm and leg were affected, and her speech was slowed for about 4 months. She did 14 months of rehabilitation, intensive. I drove to see her every other weekend that first year, a 4-hour round trip each time. And I would arrive and she would be in the middle of some exercise, retraining her hand to hold a pen, retraining her ankle to take weight. And she would look up at me with this expression I struggled to name until one day I finally placed it. Patience. Not resignation, patience. Helen, who had always been as practical as I was, as little inclined toward sentiment as anyone I knew, Helen was approaching her body with a quality of attention I had never seen in her before. Something deliberate and unhurried, something that looked from the outside almost like listening. She told me once in the garden at the rehabilitation facility on a Thursday afternoon in late October, "I thanked my left arm this morning." She said it the way you might report a weather observation, factual, no particular emotion around it. I said, "Good job." It held the coffee cup all the way to the table. She was looking at a bird near the garden wall when she said it, not at me. I didn't say anything. I filed it away under stroke recovery is its own particular country, and Helen is learning its particular customs. I thought it was something the therapist had suggested, a coping technique. I didn't understand yet that it was something she had learned that I hadn't, that it was, in fact, what none of the clinical literature had ever told either of us, that the body is not a machine you manage. It is a relationship you are inside of, whether you pay attention to it or not. I started learning that at 77, sitting in the dark, waiting for my hip. I wish someone had told me earlier. I would have been a better pharmacist. The first thing nobody prepared me for was the permanence of the discomfort. I want to be precise about that word because I am a precise person and I owe it to you to be precise here. Discomfort is not pain. I'm not talking about pain, or not primarily. I'm talking about a quality that is almost impossible to describe to someone who doesn't yet live in it. The fact that something is always there. When I was 50 and had a headache, I took something and the headache went away, and I stopped thinking about it. When I was 60 and my knee was sore after a long walk, I rested and it resolved. There was a before and an after, a state without the thing, and then a state with the thing, and then a state without it again. At 79, that structure no longer applies to everything. There is something in my left hip that is simply there. Not every moment, not in the way a toothache is there, but present, in the background, like a low frequency you learn to hear after a while. It doesn't fully resolve when I rest, doesn't spike dramatically enough to constitute a crisis. It is simply the condition of the hip now. It is what the hip is. For 30 years, I counseled patients about chronic pain management. I knew the terminology, central sensitization, pain chronification, the difference between nociceptive and neuropathic. I had very good professional language for this. What I did not have, what that language absolutely did not give me, was any preparation for what it means to do the mental work of making peace with something that will not leave. You stop waiting for it to go. That is the adjustment. And nobody told me that the adjustment was its own project, its own thing to grieve and then accept. I had to figure that out without a roadmap. The second thing, I did not know how much of my mind the body would begin to require. Getting dressed in the morning. I know how that sounds. I'm not talking about physical difficulty, though there is some of that too. I'm talking about attention, where the attention goes. When I was 60, I could get dressed while thinking about something else entirely. Planning my day, rehearsing a difficult conversation, working through a problem in my head. The body handled itself. I hardly noticed it. Now the body is present, not dramatically, not constantly, but insistently. Reaching for a button, sitting to put on shoes, moving from one room to the next with a little more care than before. Each of these things now receives a portion of my attention that they never claimed before. The body has, as I've come to think of it, entered the room. I resented this for a long time. I will admit that plainly. I had spent my whole adult life inside a mind, and the mind was where I lived, and the body was what? The vehicle, the thing that carried the mind from one place to another and that I maintained, the way you maintain a car, reasonable food, adequate sleep, the annual physical. I thought of the body as a dependency, not a relationship. By 2022, the body had made clear it had a different understanding of our arrangement. The third thing, and this is the one I find hardest to say plainly because it sounds as though it should be small and it is not small at all, is the mirror. I know what I look like. I have seen my face for 79 years. I know about the age spots on the backs of my hands, the way the skin has thinned over the knuckles, the slight tremor in my right hand when I'm tired. I know all of this. And yet, I will be at the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, washing my face, and I look up. And for a fraction of a second before the knowledge catches up, I am surprised. Not horrified, not in grief, just surprised. There is a person inside here who still, in some essential way, experiences herself as younger. Not young, not 30, but not 79 either. Somewhere in the territory of late 40s or early 50s maybe. That person looks in the mirror and sees a 79-year-old woman, and there is this small, recurring internal adjustment that has to happen every single time. I stood at that mirror in January of 2022, and I looked at my hands, the pharmacist's hands, the ones that had counted and measured and dispensed for 30 years, the age spots, the thin skin over the knuckles, the faint tremor when I was tired. And I thought, I know these hands in terms of what they can do. I do not know what it means to inhabit them now. That was the first time I thought clearly. I may have been wrong about what preparation means. No medical school teaches this, no pharmacy program, no wellness magazine. Nobody sits you down and says the inside of you will not age at the same rate as the outside of you, and the gap between them will surprise you for the rest of your life. And then the fourth thing, the one I did not expect. Tuesday morning, January of 2023, I was standing at my kitchen window making tea, and there were birds at the feeder in the backyard. 4 of them, small, moving in that quick, unsteady way birds move. I watched them. I watched them for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because when I finally looked up at the clock, I thought I had been standing there for maybe 2. That was the surprise. Not the birds themselves, but the completeness of the attention I had given them without deciding to. There was nothing else in my mind during those 11 minutes. No planning, no worry, no list of what needed doing after tea, just the birds, the cold light on the snow, the way one of them kept returning to the same spot on the feeder. I had never been able to do that before, not at 60, not at 50. My mind was always carrying 2 or 3 things at once. It was what made me good at my job, the capacity to track multiple things simultaneously. I thought of that as a feature. I thought speed and attention were the same thing. What I understood at that kitchen window, standing there a little slower than I used to, moving with a little more care than I used to, was that the slowing had given me something, not in exchange for what it had taken, not as a consolation prize, just in addition, a quality of presence that faster versions of myself had never needed to develop, because I could always outrun the moment. I stood there with my tea going cold, and 11 minutes disappeared, and I was completely, entirely nowhere else. I called Helen that evening. I told her about the birds. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "It happened to me in the rehab garden. I watched a bee on a flower for a long time. I thought, this is what I was always too fast to see." We talked for an hour. It was the longest phone call we'd had in years. Here's what I know now that I did not know when I was 50 or 60 or even 70. Knowledge about a thing is not the same as being ready for it. I spent 30 years behind that counter giving people information about their bodies. Good information, accurate, carefully communicated, delivered with the authority of someone who had read the literature and understood it. And I believed completely and without question that understanding something was the same as being prepared for it, that the clinical knowledge would protect me when the time came. It did not for any of the four things, not even close. I think about Mrs. Patterson now. I think about the 20 years of conversations we had about her pain management and how precise I was, how careful, how genuinely useful the information was. And I wonder whether anyone ever sat with her and asked not about the medications, but about the mornings. Whether anyone ever asked her, what does it feel like to live in your body right now? Not what is wrong with it, not what we can do about it. What does it feel like to be inside it? I never asked her that. It didn't occur to me to ask it. I thought I already knew. Helen said something to me about 6 months into her rehabilitation that I have thought about almost every day since. We were walking, slowly. She was still relearning the gait pattern, and she said, "The stroke took things from me, but it gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost." I asked, "What?" She said, "The sense that my body is on my side." I'd been treating it like a problem to manage. It isn't a problem. It's the only way I get to be here. I sat with that for a long time. She wasn't being poetic. Helen is no more inclined to poetry than I am. She was saying something completely practical. The relationship she'd had with her body had been adversarial, demanding, correcting, ignoring unless there was a crisis, and the stroke had forced her to build something different. What she built was more honest than what she'd had before, more workable. She talked to her arm. She thanked her legs for holding. She checked in the way you'd check in with a colleague you were counting on. I didn't need a stroke to learn that, but I needed something. It took me 77 years and a bed edge morning in the dark. I think about how many people are right now doing exactly what I did, treating the body as a machine to optimize, reading articles about the right supplements, the right sleep position, the right exercise protocol. And all of that is fine. Some of it is genuinely useful, but it is not the same as a relationship. It is not the same as the thing Helen learned in the rehab garden and that I learned at my kitchen window at 6:47 in the morning. You can be very well informed about something and have no relationship with it whatsoever. That is, in the end, what I had spent 30 years demonstrating to myself and to anyone who came to my counter. The relationship you build now is the one you will have access to later. The habits of attention you develop now toward the body, toward its signals, toward the small, ordinary ways it asks to be noticed are the ones you'll have to draw on when the mornings start requiring a little more patience. You don't have to wait for a hip that needs a minute. You don't have to wait for a stroke. You can start building this now from wherever you are. What does that look like? Nothing dramatic. Helen thanks her arm. That's it, she says internally, quietly. Good job. You did that. I started doing something similar after I talked to her. Nothing anyone can see, just a small acknowledgement, a kind of checking in. The hands that make the tea, the legs that carry me to the window, the body that gets me here. Every morning, negotiation and all. Tonight, just notice something. Not to fix it, not to decide whether it's a symptom, not to look it up and worry about it. Just notice the way your shoulders feel right now, the way your breath moves, the small sounds in the room you're in. Give it the 11 minutes I gave the birds without planning to. Tell me in the comments, what has your body been trying to tell you that you haven't had time to hear? Because I spent 30 years helping other people answer that question, and I was answering the wrong version of it. I'd like to know if you're further along than I was.